Hi, in this video we're going to talk about robots. In this video I'm going to unpack the following things. First of all, how many humanoid robots can we actually expect in the coming years? Can we expect humanoid robots to be just like cars, so we see one at every street corner and even have one in our home, see them in restaurants, in hospitals, or will there be a lot fewer? The second part is about how much are these robots going to cost. Will you be able to afford one or maybe more robots during the next 5 to 10 years, or will they be too expensive? I'm going to do a comparison with a normal family car, like for example a Toyota Corolla, so you can have an idea about the cost of not just buying a robot but also maintaining it. And I think that the third part you're probably wondering about is, well, when can you actually buy it? When will it actually be useful to have a robot? So I'm going to look into that as well. Also, I'm going to be looking at what can these robots actually do. So can they do like normal office work? Will they mainly be in factories, or will they be mainly at home with people, helping them with everyday chores? So I'm going to try to unpack the actual truth of what we can expect in the next 5, 10 and 15 years. At the end of the video, I'm going to reveal when I think a robot will be able to do almost anything that a human can. So in principle, we could just sit back and enjoy ourselves and let the robots do all the work. So you might be thinking, do I even want these robots? You might feel that they seem scary to you, but consider this. If we have AGI, so in many ways artificial intelligence becomes more clever than we are, then who is going to do the work for the AGI? Well, if we don't have robots, it's going to be us humans. So in some ways you can say a society without robots but with artificial general intelligence, well, then the humans would be sort of slaves to the artificial intelligence, at least in the way that we would be their hand and their feet. So this is where robots come in. They will actually be able to be the hand and the feet of the AGIs. I'm not saying that they will control humans. I'm just saying humans might still be in control and actually be running the show, but the AGI will be doing a lot of the heavy thinking, and the robots will then be doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of work. But let's talk about how many robots we can expect out there. So I think that the question is quite difficult to answer. One way is, of course, to look at who is going to produce the robots and what do they actually project in terms of number of robots. Another thing we could do is to look at the media and say what different people are projecting. There have been different experts, and for example Elon Musk, talking about how many robots he believes there will be at certain times. Looking at this graph we have right here, it's important to notice that the scale is logarithmic. So if it goes straight, it actually means the development is exponential. These numbers are taken from different sources and quotes, and it ends up saying that there will be 20 billion robots by 2050, and that will probably start with about 10 million robots, mainly in factories, by 2025 or 2026. Whether this is actually realistic, I still think there's a lot of doubt around that. I think that this is on the positive side, if you want many robots out there, of what we can actually expect. That said, I do think the development will be exponential. If we, for example, looked at cars that were invented around the 1890 mark, we can see that not a lot actually happened until we got around to 1908, where the Ford T model was invented, and then we saw this exponential lift. So I actually think, it's not like robots have just been invented, but you can say the more humanoid robots that can do more different tasks, that they are quite new and they are not possible to purchase quite yet, but We are close, but I will get back to that. Looking at, for example, computers, we're kind of seeing the same thing. It's a very exponential curve. In the beginning, a relatively slow start, but then it really takes off. So will robots have a pattern like computers or like cars, or somewhere in the middle? I think there are arguments for both. And also, how will it actually feel? How will a society feel with 10,000 robots? I think with 10,000 robots, it will not feel like we're living in a world of robots, because there will be around 160 humans per robot. But of course, if we get to 20 billion robots, then at that point there's probably around 10 or 11 billion people in the world. But that would mean there would be 2 robots for every person. Anyway, that then would start to feel pretty crowded, and you would start, I think, in the around 2040s, you would start to notice robots at least as much as you notice pets, for example, like how much you notice dogs or cats. That said, I don't think that really matters that much, because I think the human mind gets used to things so quickly that even at this pace, we'll get used to the robots as they increase in numbers. So one argument that you could actually say that the development of the number of robots might be even more exponential than, for example, computers and cars would be that quite soon you would be able to make robots that can make other robots. So of course you would say, well, robots are already making cars and robots are already making computers, but there's still kind of that human component, that human input. But as soon as we start making robots, we might pretty soon see that robots will be able to make other robots without any human intervention or support, or at least very little intervention. So that could scale this development quicker. Another way of looking at how quick the adoption of robots might be would be to look at the affordability. So how much are these robots actually going to cost? We'll get back to the exact amounts, but I looked at, for example, cars when they were introduced when the 4T model was introduced in 1908. It was actually 21 monthly salaries it took to buy it. When we had some of the first IBM and Mac computers, they cost pretty much around 1 monthly salary to buy. And then if we're looking at the robots, some of the cheaper models will be around 4 monthly salaries. So in that way, they will be more affordable than cars were back then to the average consumer, but less affordable than computers. So you could say that the adoption could be somewhere in the middle because of that. Okay, but now let's look at the actual robots, the actual models that you may be able to purchase. So of course, you've seen the Tesla robot, Optimus, which is probably the one where there are most videos around there. And the second, I think, most famous robot at this moment might be the X1 robot, which is made in Norway. And that might also be the one, the robot that will actually be released to the market most quickly, because they believe that they might be able to release next year, so in 2025, whereas the Tesla robot will probably be released for purchase sometimes in 2026. So you can't actually buy a robot right now. You still have to wait just a little bit. So the other big players in the game would be like UBTech Robotics from China. It would be Agility Robots also from the US, and Kenon Robotics also from China, and then Boston Dynamics. So I think that the first impressive robots that you really noticed, they were from Boston Dynamics. That was the Atlas robot that we're seeing here. So the thing is, the Atlas robot may never be commercially available for the end consumer. It's simply more of a development project. even the Spot robot that has already been released for commercial use, it's not really a humanoid robot, so it shouldn't really count here because this video is about humanoid robots. But it's also very expensive. It's coming in at $75,000, whereas the X1 is likely to cost around $10,000 to $15,000, and the Tesla robot is likely to cost around $20,000. Looking at these stats, it does seem like that the first robot that you could consider, or your company might consider, might be the X1 robot produced in Norway, or indeed the Tesla robot called Optimus. And it would probably be either the Optimus 2 or the Optimus 3 model. But as you know, when you buy something like a robot, it's a little bit like buying a car. It's not just about the purchase price. You actually might be able to lease it or rent it. It looks like those will be some of the models, whereas you can get your hands on your first robot. So it's not so much about the purchasing price. It's also about like what is the energy cost. So just like a car, if you have an EV, you will use electricity. If you buy a car that runs on gasoline, of course it will be the gasoline cost. So there will be a cost for energy for the robots. There will be some form of insurance cost. So I think this one is quite unpredictable. But if it does some damage in the home, or it could also be an insurance in terms of if something breaks that is not supposed to break. That said, there will probably be a warranty. And then there will be some maintenance, just like a car needs a service once or twice a year. It will be the same thing for the robot. So I think it's relatively unpredictable with these costs, but I've been trying to estimate them from different sources, from what the companies are saying, and from the details I could find in my research on, for example, ChatGPT. So it turns out that the total cost of the X1 robot compared to, for example, a Toyota Corolla would be quite a lot less. Most likely, your combined cost of having the robot would be around $2,200, maybe to around $2,500 outside of your cost of purchasing it. So if you imagine that you're not purchasing it, but instead you would be leasing it, so maybe the cost would run you somewhere between $3,000 and $4,000 a year. Actually owning or leasing a Toyota Corolla would be somewhere around 50% more expensive. If you can afford a car, or maybe you have two cars and say we don't need two cars, I would prefer to have a robot and a car, then it's definitely possible for, I think, most middle class homes to actually buy and maintain a robot. Okay, so is this expensive or is it actually cheap? You need to look at the utility, right? If a robot can work 15 hours a day, for example, what do you think the hourly wage would be if you consider all the costs? Well, it's as low as 40 cents an hour. So in that way, your robot would be a super cheap help in the house. Again, if we compare a little bit the X1 to, for example, the Tesla robot, it does seem that the Tesla robot would be a little bit more expensive at this point. But I also think all of these prices, they're going to drop quite dramatically in the next 5 years. So again, robots will definitely be cheap, and it will definitely be something that most households will be able to afford. At least it will be a matter of prioritizing holidays or that extra car or that holiday house, for example. It will be within reach for most people in the next 5 years to get their first robot. The question is, of course, do you want one? So here we can see some of the different robots, how they look. Also, like, how tall are they? So the ones we've been talking about, like the Tesla robot is 173. The X1 is slightly taller at 175. They weigh around 56 kilos. The X1 weighs around 68 kilos. So they're pretty much like, you could say, a small human. and so they're pretty compact. And then the battery life for example the X1, we're talking about 8 hours, and it's very similar for the Tesla, but they're quite quick to recharge. So if you want to get more out of the robot than just the 8 hours, then that's definitely possible to within the same day to recharge and then give it tasks to do, for example, while you sleep. But then what can they actually do? That is what we're going to look into now. Because so I think the question for me, is it more like a funny toy where you you buy it for a novelty, but then you figure out that you don't really need it? Or is it something when you buy it, you will say, well, I don't know how I could live without having a robot? And I think that this is still very much an open question. But I also think it's important to state that the first places these robots are going to work will probably not be in home. Most likely the Tesla ones, they're very much built and designed for factories to work on repetitive tasks. For example, building the Tesla cars. And then later they might go into more, for example, like healthcare applications, so working as sorts of caregivers to people, maybe in nursery homes. The X1 is slightly different. It's actually very good for surveillance and patrolling, so it's kind of a security robot, at least in the beginning. But it also has a focus on healthcare and elder care, so it's a little bit similar to the Tesla bot. Finally, the X1 robot is also meant to be in the hospitality sector, so like receptions, being at events, helping people, supplying information, and so on. So actually, it seems at this point that the X1 is a little bit more versatile than the Tesla robot, but we'll have to see how effective they actually are. But then one of the questions I had is, well, are these robots actually efficient? Are they quick? Are they strong? Can they carry a load that is heavier than yourself? For example, if you bought this robot and you wanted it to lift something that you're not able to lift, could it do that for you? And the quite clear answer in the beginning is no, it cannot. I mean, the load capacity for these robots is very low. I mean, we're talking around 10 kilos. So we'll definitely not be able to lift and walk with something that you can't lift and walk with yourself, at least in the beginning. And I've then tried to research and get some estimations on when that might change. And it does seem that like around 2030, it will reach the strength level of the average woman. Around 2035, it will reach the strength level of the average man. But then, for example, when we look all the way to 2050, it will exceed human strength by quite a lot, by 2 or 3 times. So it slowly it's becoming as strong as a gorilla, for example. But what about the speed? So of course there's the speed at doing things with the hands, and I could not find exact data for that. But right now they are slower. If we're looking at these robots folding clothes, for example, it's quite clear that a human can do it quicker themselves. But if we look at walking speed, the conclusion is also here, if we look at the blue line, that, well, it is slower than humans. So at least it's a lot slower than humans if you compare to the humans actually running. So right now they have kind of a walking speed that might be similar to humans, and they are not able to run currently. Most likely around 2030 they will be designed to run as well, and at that point they will kind of be similar in speed to humans running. But then when we get to 2035 and onward, they might be a lot quicker in terms of running and walking than humans are. But we may also see different designs. We may see designs where the robots might wear blades, for example, instead of feet, for them to be able to run as fast as possible. So the point here is robots to begin with are actually weak and slow, but then they will develop in the next 20-25 years to be much faster and much stronger than we are. Let's look at what the robots are actually going to do. Because I think this is the whole point, right? How helpful are they actually going to be? Because definitely they will not be that expensive, but will they be effective at different tasks? I think the quite clear answer is yes, they will be effective, but in the beginning, maybe not so much. So I think in the beginning, they would need to learn from the environment. The robot will actually be data collectors, really. They will be a new way for artificial intelligence to get data about the real world. And that data will then be used for them to be more and more effective in different environments. So for example, if we imagine them in a home, they would need to learn and understand the home and the routines that are done in the home before it becomes truly effective. But looking at some of these tasks, so just like, for example, we see ChatGPT being able to do administrative work, if there's some physical component to that work, like moving some papers from one office to the other, then the robots will probably be able to do this quite well right off the bat when we're able to buy them. Of course, I mean, in terms of driving, I don't know how relevant this will be, because I think, then the car will be the actual robot. So in that way, I don't think it's going to be the humanoid robots that will be driving. That said, you might have some industrial vehicles where the robot would be taught to actually operate them, because they have not been built to be controlled by an AI. So again, this will happen quite quickly. So house cleaning, they will probably be more efficient around 2027. The same when it comes to elder care, like monitoring or some routine tasks. It could be taking care of wounds, for example. That might come a little bit later. Doing laundry, washing, folding, the robots should be able to do that effectively in around 2028. Cooking meals, for example, is slightly more complex. So we are probably looking at 2030, where they're starting to assist in the cooking, and a little bit later when they can do the cooking completely autonomously. So we still have to cook our own food, it seems, for the next 6 years. Grocery shopping will probably come at the same time. But again, the question is, what is the physical component? Most likely it will just be ordering something online and then perhaps receiving that grocery basket and then distributing it to the fridge, for example. So we'll see that in about 6 years as well. In about 7-8 years, we should be able to see the robots actually helping in the garden. So at that point, we may not need the gardener anymore. It could be mowing the lawn, but it could be more complex tasks as like cutting down trees and so on. That will probably come later. For more complex tasks, such as, for example, childcare or personal fitness training, we'll have to wait a bit longer. So here the time horizon is about 10 years before we can expect the robots to be able to do with this. There may, of course, be differences depending on the age of the child and how complex it would be to look after the child. But again, the safety issue here is extremely important, and the same would be true when it came to personal fitness. And here it's not just about intelligence, it's also about strength, of course. So finally, when can we expect that the robots can do almost any task that a human can do? Well, it's definitely more than 10 years. And I also think it's not just about if the robots are actually able to do all these tasks. It's also if we're willing to let them do it, and it's also actually adopting it. So just because a robot is able to walk around in a restaurant, for example, it may take a few years from the day the robot is able to doing it before the owners of restaurants actually decide to do it. So in the end, we may not see robots completing every task that humans do, but I do think we are heading to a society where we'll see them do quite a number of tasks that humans do today. But just to sum up, if we try to consider where and when we will see robots in different parts of society, so when can we say that our society is truly robotic, I think we can look at the adoption rate in different environments. So I've been looking at when will the adoption rate move from around 10% in an environment to around 50%. So I think when it's at 50%, it's considered completely normal to encounter robots. So the factories will definitely be first. You might see a lot of videos with the X1 robot or the Tesla robot in more home environments, just to show that they're capable of it. But I think in reality, it will be in the factories that we'll see the first adoption of these robots. So that will be starting, more or less next year and the next 10 years before we see that 50% adoption in factories. And of course, again, there will be a difference. I think the US and China will be heading this, and then the rest of the world will follow. When it comes to commercial spaces, this is probably quite important to how it actually feels to live in the world with robots, because most humans don't actually go to factories on an everyday basis, but we do go to commercial spaces like, for example, restaurants or cafes or hospitals. And here we see a slightly delayed implementation compared to, for example, the factories. So I think it will start in 2026 with the humanoid robots. We'll see around maybe 10% adoption, so it will still be relatively rare. I think we'll be all the way in 2040 before most or more than 50% of public spaces, event centers, hospitals, restaurants and cafes have actually implemented the robots. Finally, I think the latest wave of adoption will come in the actual homes. I think there will be some reluctance. There's of course the cost parameter, whether you want the extra car or you want the robot. But I do think that we'll see a wider implementation of robots in our homes and in our gardens, doing things like cooking and helping with the kids and so on, from around 2030 to 2045 before it's considered normal to have a robot. So I think when we get to around 2050, people will probably ask, well, why don't you have a robot, instead of asking, why do you have a robot? So at least these are my predictions, and I think when we are at around 2050, I think it will be quite difficult to find a task that we don't feel comfortable that robots will actually be able to perform. I hope you found this interesting. Please do like and subscribe if you liked the video and the channel. See you soon again.